Hello, this is Patrick Daly and welcome to Interlinks. Interlinks is a programme about globalisation and the effects it has had on Ireland and other countries around the world over the last 50 years or so. In each programme we interview a person from another country or with strong connections to another country or countries to get their unique perspective on globalisation as it has affected them, their life, their work and their business. There's a little bit of history, a dash of economics, a sprinkling of business and an overlay of personal experience both from me and from my interviewees from around the world. Today we will be talking to the Chief Operating Officer of an Irish-owned company that develops, sources and distributes homeware products in the Irish market. The company is B&G Homeware and its COO is Adrian Carolan. Adrian has been with B&G since 1994. He travels extensively around the world dealing with suppliers and setting up the international supply chains that are an integral part of B&G's business today. Adrian studied engineering at college and later went on to complete an MBA, enabling him to blend technical competence with business nous in his role as Chief Operating Officer. I'm delighted to have Adrian join me in the studio today to talk about his experiences and reflections on doing business internationally from Ireland and to get his perspective on the future for his business and for Ireland in this globalised world. Welcome, Adrian, and thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for inviting me in.
You're very welcome. So just maybe to kick off, could you tell us a little bit about your career start and progression to date? I guess it's kind of, 30 years or so, give or take? We've just been talking, yeah?
Yeah, I was just remembering and trying to recap. I qualified in engineering in 1985, and as probably you remember, Patrick, that was probably in the midst of one of the
deepest recessions
we had. We came out of college with an unemployment rate of almost 18% at that stage. So at that time, I don't think engineering was maybe not so much a career, but more of a means to trying to find employment in some way or other. So I spent first 6 months looking for work, with the view that I'd stick around until Christmas and hopefully if I found something great. If not, I was actually planning to emigrate, like most of my peers at that time.
Yeah, most of us did, I think.
Yeah. 2 weeks before Christmas, I got myself a job in Dundalk in a small electronics company. It introduced me. It was more just to introduce me to the workforce.
And where is it you were going to go?
I was heading for Austria.
Okay.
I'd worked there.
It's interesting. I know most people say, I was going to Australia, I was going to Canada, I was going to America, but Austria's a strange choice.
Yeah, I'd worked there I'd taken summer work there when I was in college, and I had some opportunities to go out there, but I wanted to give Ireland a try and see how I could make things go, and just about made it. So I got myself into the workforce, and it got me earning, and it started my career off. I stayed there for 2 years. I learned a few things there, but the big opportunity came about 2 years later. A procurement role came up with the James Crean Group, a company that I don't think exists now, but they were real high flyers at that time.
What business were they in?
The Crean Group was your traditional industrial holding company. They did basically anything from frozen foods to aircraft leasing and lots in between. And my role initially was a procurement role in the electrical component side of the business. But as the business, their strategy was basically to keep buying up and hoovering up lots of small companies, to be very, very heavily diversified, and to use management expertise to try and grow and develop these businesses. And for quite a period of time, they were quite successful in that. And from my perspective, it exposed me to so many different product areas. So I started out in electrical. By the time I finished with them 5-6 years later, I had been buying sports goods, musical instruments, housewares, confectionery, all sorts of different products.
And was that internationally as well as nationally?
It was all been imported from probably not as widespread as happened over the years. A lot of it was coming from the UK and mainland Europe, a little bit from the US. But what it did expose me to the whole sort of commercial side of procurement, and it gave me a bit of international exposure.
And at that time, there would have been customs and all of that, even from Europe and the UK, wouldn't there?
Yes,
in those years.
It was a paperwork nightmare, and a lot of people made a lot of money out of the paperwork that was necessary. Hopefully, we're not heading that direction from next year. Yeah. One of the things I was recalling about Creans, and maybe the whole diversification of what they were really, really widely diversified in the products that they were in, and it probably ended up being their downfall because it took I think it was the aircraft leasing part of the business that ran into
quite specialised, isn't it?
Yeah, it ran into a little bit of trouble and had impacts right throughout the business. So the company I was with was called James Crean Distribution, and they actually ended up selling that off to the business off to Allegro, and another high-flying company were sort of about to float.
And Allegro, I believe, now are part of the DCC group.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. And again, like a lot of businesses in that time, they rose to great heights, and things didn't work out so well. I stayed with Allegro for about a year. It wasn't really for me. Then a great opportunity came along with B&G. So
we're talking now, we're in kind of early 90s, mid 90s.
Yeah, we're going into 1994. Yeah. So I met with B&G at that stage was almost 20 years old, and had been a traditional wholesale and distribution business into the hardware and building trade.
And that brought you to Dublin. Had you lived in Dublin before?
I had, yeah. No, when I was with Creans, I'd moved to Dublin in sort of the late 80s, and so I'd settled down and at that stage. But with one of the things that attracted me to B&G was they had been through sort of 20 years of the business, doing reasonably well, but still not making the progress that it might have done. And the shareholders had quite a vision for the business. They wanted to change the business. They wanted to introduce a lot more marketing into the business, and traditionally they were coming from a wholesale, quite a conservative type of business, but they wanted to introduce much more marketing concepts, and they had quite ambitious growth plans for a small business, and they intended to build a small team to drive that business on for them. And I took up the procurement role with them. Actually, it was a full operations, logistics, transport.
In 94, what was the economy like here? I was away that whole period. That was kind of before the Celtic Tiger, wasn't it? Or could you feel it even then?
It was. It was just about. We're just about to see shoots that things were turning around. Yeah. You have to imagine we'd been through. Basically, the country was bankrupt in the late 80s.
And had no infrastructure.
No, none whatsoever. And we were just coming out of that. And a lot of people may have been bruised by what had happened before. But what I saw in B&G was ambition. I saw a plan. I saw a strive. I was still a young man at that stage, but I saw an ambition and a vision for what the guys wanted to do with the business, and I very much wanted to be a part of that. So certainly the first from 94 to 2000 was quite an exciting time in B&G.
So how has the business changed since the 90s then into the 2000s? So we had the Celtic Tiger, then we had that massive crash, and then this last, say, 10 years since the last recession. How would you typify what's happened to the business over those three?
It's interesting. I tried to sort of put a different label on each of the different times. Certainly the first between 94 and early 2000, it was a very ambitious focus on driving growth. So we engaged in a lot of new product activity. We had at the time we set ourselves a target of that in each year we would try and generate at least 10% of our turnover from new products that would have been identified the previous year. And from procurement side of things, that whilst it was challenging, it really pushed you on and made you focus, that you had to look at a lot of things. You had to start to look beyond what you might normally have done. So that the first phase was very much pushing on, driving growth. We go into the thousands, into the noughties, and particularly after maybe 2002, 2003, where the Celtic Tiger completely took off. And I would label that phase as learning and trying to cope. Okay, you didn't have to work too hard to achieve turnover, but you had to work very hard to put in resources,
stay on top of things.
Yeah, and to be able to fuel what was a very, very hungry animal, the Celtic Tiger, and it was as much to do with sort of putting in supply chain structures to make sure that you could cope with what the market was looking for. I remember early 2000s we had a warehouse that was bursting to capacity, and
you lifted a roof off that warehouse.
That's right. We built a new warehouse over. We doubled the height of the warehouse that we had, and took the old roof away when it was all completed, and it was all done whilst we continued to operate underneath. So it more or less doubled our capacity overnight. We had looked at alternative properties, but at that time the property boom was kicking in. So we decided, okay, there has to be an engineering solution, and maybe that goes back to my engineering days. I did get some benefit out of it. So that phase was very much how do we cope with the demand that's there? How do we keep things running that we can fuel this? Then we hit the downturn, and what was the most? It was tough times. The crash in, for us, it happened probably. We were starting to see signs of it in 2007, and which is probably lucky for us in that I feel that we were reasonably well prepared when it did actually really go drop. Like in 2008, our turnover declined by 50%. Wow. In 2009, it declined by another 50%. So you're talking resources, everything had to be trimmed. And then that was actually that was a learning experience for all of us. Okay, what do you do in situations like that? So I would regard that as survival mode, and you learn a lot about yourself when you're in survival mode, and it can be somewhat invigorating as well. I have to say, unfortunately, we sort of had to change our management structure, and a lot of the senior management had to revert back to hands-on, and that can be quite invigorating. And I think myself and the team, a lot of us found it that because we were very much in survival mode. So that's how I describe sort of between let's say 2008 and 2011. It was very much keep this thing going, and we managed to do that. The period that followed after that was, I suppose, it was very flat, and it was actually quite frustrating, and we were just basically waiting for growth to happen, and eventually it did happen.
And we've 2014.
Yeah. And at that stage, I suppose I decided to make a structural change in 2014. Okay, having sort of been sure that the business would survive, I actually decided, okay, all right, we needed some new blood. And I stepped aside, and one of my colleagues, Tom Cleary, took over as CEO, and it was really just to get new blood and new ideas into the business, which I think is something that's quite important for a lot of businesses. Is that I think that there is a tendency that people hang around doing the same job for a little bit too long, and they end up in the same way of doing things. So a bit of change, and it's worked. Certainly, the last 5 years have been really good for us. And
the international aspect of your sourcing and supply chain with B&G, was that always there, or did it come along at some point in those years that we've just been through? There was always, when I came into the business, there was always an indirect connection. Okay, so in other words, you were dealing with a little bit in the Far East and beyond, but it was always through a third party. And it was one of the things that I particularly wanted. I wanted to try and get as close as I could
to source. First of all, I knew that I'd been charged with bringing in products and finding suppliers to grow the business as quick as we wanted, and we always needed something new. And I felt that you got to get to source, and it's as a distributor, you're always looking for things that you're going to do for your customers that they might find it difficult to do for themselves. So, a lot of our customers would have been retailers and builders merchants, and they can go to agents and they can go to third parties themselves. Okay, so what are we going to do that's going to be different? So I always felt we had to get back to source. So I spent a lot of time then out and about. And basically, I would have travelled the world. I remember going to in the I think I was only a couple of years into my career, and I got sent off to Guatemala. Okay, all right. Now, why? Okay, we were importing timber moldings at that stage, and somebody had met somebody from Guatemala, so I was sent off there. Now, ultimately, it was an interesting trip, and not an awful lot came out of it. But you do have to do that. You have to sort of
get boots on the ground in these places.
Yeah. And more often, a lot of these trips, more often than not, things did. Something came out of it, and it mightn't have come out immediately, but it might have been 2 or 3 years later that you said, okay, all right, I know something.
This brings them a little bit to what makes B&G different. So what would you describe as the core expertise or competences of B&G as it is today?
Okay. Well, one of the things that we've always had as our key objective is to be close to our customers. Okay, so I said earlier we set the objective of bringing something new, new products. 10% of our growth in the early days had to come from new products. And one of the things about introducing new products is a lot of that needs to be done face to face, particularly if somebody's seeing something they mightn't have seen before. So all our people, we would visit all of our customers at least once a month, some of them once or twice per month, and it gives you the opportunity. If what I would have charged myself would give the guys something to talk to their customers every time, something new to talk to their customers. So that sort of starts a conversation where your customers then are starting to tell you what they need, what is important for them, and I think that conversation is very, very important for us to understand what's important to them. So that's been quite important for us. The second thing I would say is we've always come from the perspective of, okay, why do customers want to talk to you? And generally they've got problems they need solving. Okay, all right. So we set ourselves the target of offering them solutions to the problems that they have. And but you obviously need to find out what they are first. But then every time you go in there is to actually have an idea of how we're going to a product that they may need or a service that they may need. And then the final thing about B&G is that we always want to be bringing something new. Okay, particularly in our market can be quite traditional. The hardware and building industry can be quite traditional, and you could end up having the same conversations all the time. So we would always like to have given our sales team something new, a little edge versus our competitor, that they've always got something new. And then
in addressing customers' needs for new things or new products, do you look to find those things in the market, or do you develop them and then have them made by somebody in the market?
In general, we do a little bit of both, but in general, we will try and get manufacturers to make products to our specification. Okay, all right. We're quite strong on our big product area is internal doors. The Irish market has quite specific sizes and standards, so we would generally have to go to a door manufacturer, and they would have to produce to our specification. But the interesting thing about going to manufacturers and going to suppliers is when you're there, you see all sorts of other things.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, which you don't see from behind your desk.
Which is the importance of getting out there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and then working abroad, because I know you've travelled quite a bit personally. What kind of challenges do you encounter? I mean, you mentioned in Guatemala, which was probably another world at that time when you went there first. But cultural, language, technical differences. How do you deal with that, and how have you dealt with it?
Well, language is a key thing, but there is an international language. I've sat across the table from Chinese manufacturers from various different countries, whatever. Neither of us spoke the same language, but we can still communicate. Mm-hmm. But I think for a country like Ireland, I think what's critical is relationships, is establishing strong relationships with your suppliers. Okay, we've got 5 million people here. It's not the biggest market that these manufacturers are going to be dealing with. So how do you reel them in? You a lot of it is down through relationships. So I would personally try to visit suppliers quite regularly. And
these days, where are we talking? We're talking China?
We're talking, well, okay, so most countries in Southeast Asia. China is quite strong. We've got some people based on the ground there. But we would have spread to further south into all of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, countries like that. Okay, South Africa has always been a traditionally strong area for us, and we would have always had an interest in Eastern Europe, and coming from the timber, we import a lot of timber products, so we would have done a lot in Central and South America as well. Yep. Okay, so language is one thing. One of the things that I've always tried is set up relationships and work on those relationships, and it's a two-way thing. In some countries where I would have. We would have set up what we would call representative offices there. So I would have people on the ground to deal directly with the manufacturers. However, that just to leave it at that, and I think a lot of companies just set it up and leave it at that. But first of all, you miss out by doing that. But you also, the people that you hired, miss out by not having the connection. You want to connect them from their source back to Ireland. And over the years, we would have brought our people from China and Southeast Asia, we would have brought them back here to Ireland, to expose them to the market here, so that they know the type of things that we're looking for, they know the type of services that we're looking for. And it also helps them to grow as individuals as well.
And what proportion of your time do you think you spend outside of Ireland then?
I'm at this last couple of years, and in particular since I changed role, and my kids have grown up as well. I found it easier to sort of take a little bit of time out. So I'm probably I'm out of the country maybe 3 months out of every 12.
Yeah. Okay. Any funny cultural anecdotes or stories, mishaps that happen in these foreign places?
There's lots. There's lots of little stories. We spoke earlier about language, and you could things can often get lost in translation. I remember at one stage I was dealing with a supplier in Vietnam, and I was trying to explain about Ireland. Now, what a lot of people don't realise is that in a lot of the world, people have never heard of Ireland, and they don't. So I was trying to explain about Ireland. I said, okay, we've market is about 4.5, the population about 4.5 million. And she said, Ireland's a very small country. And I said, yes. I said, but never underestimate the Irish. And she looked at me straight, and I said she obviously didn't get that. And I said, "Oh, what do you think I said?" And she said, "Why do you say never underestimate the Irish?"
Never underestimate the Irish.
So I had to explain that. So sometimes things get lost in translation.
What kind of advice would you give to Irish businesses and business people who maybe are a little bit nervous about going to countries that are termed kind of, developing or underdeveloped, looking either for source of product or looking just to do business there? What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say first thing is always look beyond the traditional sources. Okay, because for no other reason than your competitors are probably doing that anyway. Okay, you're not going to get in. So move beyond the traditional sources and look into places that you think, okay, there might be something a little bit different. I always say not to underestimate the benefit of establishing good long-term relationships. As a small country, as a small market, we may not have volumes to offer people, and people why do people do business? They do it for different reasons. It could be price, could be they need to have it, they need a product. But more often than not, they do business because they like to do business. And I think relationships are quite important. And just to finish off on that, I think it's always go into a trading relationship with a supplier with a win-win attitude. It's got to be something in it for them as well as for you. And if you can find that, you will have the bones to a long-term relationship.
How are you finding things now, maybe on a more general macro level, in terms of economies growing again, tightening of the labour market? Is that something, skill shortage? Is that something that's coming through for you?
I have to say I do hear a lot about it, and I hear we're more or less at full employment. We've been quite lucky in B&G over the years in that our staff retention has been quite high, and it's we work on that. We work on the basis that your people are your core asset, and we look after them well, and we try to create an environment where they want to stay. However, I do note that the last couple of recruitments that we've had, it was mostly from recruited from outside of Ireland. You're starting to see with the way the global market is, a lot of companies, particularly in distribution, are starting to go down the AI route and automation. Okay, and we're seeing a lot more, particularly in warehouses, voice picking and that's
so more automation, more recruitment from overseas.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the future of your business, what's the strategy for the future? Where do you see it going over the next 5 years, say?
Okay. We have a reasonably positive outlook on the market. One of the key areas for us is the construction market, which is still an underdeveloped area. Now, none of us want to get back to where we were in 2006, building 100,000 houses that nobody wanted to live in. They might have wanted to own them. We think that sort of most analysts would say that we need to develop. We need to be building 25 to 30,000 houses a year. We're a long way away from that. So you can't ignore the potential of that for a business like ourselves. So it's trying to keep ahead of the trends, make sure that you've got a good source of supply to make sure that you can fuel that demand that's in there.
Okay, and then we're kind of coming to the end now. Time flies. We're always beaten by the clock on this program. But outside of the world of work and outside the world of travel for work, what kind of things do you like to do?
Well, for my sins, I'm a five-a-side football player. I play a couple of times a week. And it's something when the kids were growing up, I didn't have time for that. I used to play a lot when I was young, and then I stopped. I did nothing for 10 or 15 years, and then I started back into it slowly. And now I'm getting on in years. It's like I'm cramming in. I can't get enough of it. So I, sometimes play 2 or 3 times a week, and it's
Well, it's good that you're able to do that.
for how long I don't know. That's one thing. I also I live in Dunboyne, and I'm heavily involved. I've coached a couple of the local GAA teams there. Mostly with the first couple of teams, I had my own sons involved, so that was obviously a motivation. But last year I went back and I decided to take on the current under-14 team. And I tell you, 14-year-olds today are very, very different from 14-year-olds when I had them. But it's a real challenge, but it's one I'm really enjoying. That's
brilliant. So where can people find out more about B&G, about its products, services and so on, and plans for the future? Website, blog, so on. Yeah, okay.
We B&G, we operate on all the main social media, Facebook, Twitter, okay, but we just developed a new website, or we've upgraded our website, and it's www.bghome.ie. We have a couple of specific websites for our doors brand. For example, is Indoors. That's www.indoors.ie, and we also have a bathroom brand, Tima, which is tema.ie. Okay.
It's TEMA, is it?
TEMA.
TEMA, yeah. Okay. Excellent. TEMA.ie. Well, thank you so much, Adrian. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, as always. And thanks also to our listeners. And remember that if you would like to find out more about globalization, international business, and how we can help you to formulate and implement your strategies, please check out my blog and website on albalogistics.com and my book, International Supply Chain Relationships, which can be purchased on Amazon and Google Books. This is Patrick Daly of Alba Consulting. Goodbye and keep well until the next time.